All right, so over in California, Governor Gruesome Gavin Newsom has been kind of popping off recently. Just a couple of days ago, he signed a bill into law that is essentially going to be giving significantly more collective bargaining rights for fast food service workers in California, as well as potentially give them significant pay raises as well. So I wanted to get into this in some of the details here because this is just an absolutely fantastic piece of legislation. But let's just remind ourselves before we get into this that we're still talking about Gavin Newsom here. Okay, he is a massively corrupted corporate Democrat, so this is not him, being the progressive vanguard or anything like that. This is him just basically sticking his finger up in the wind and seeing, recent polling data like this showing that approval for labor unions is at basically an all-time high in modern American history, and this just happens to be a piece of legislation where he thinks it could help his future presidential ambitions. So with that being laid out there, let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. They say Newsom signs groundbreaking law for low-wage workers. So what are they talking about here? They say California Governor Gavin Newsom on Monday signed a bill that could increase wages for fast food workers to up to $22 an hour in what labor advocates are touting as a groundbreaking step for low-wage workers. So yes, on the one hand, it is groundbreaking, but at the same time, $22 an hour is like barely a living wage. Okay, so we're talking about now getting sort of the bare minimum of what these people actually deserve. But they say driving the news, Newsom signed the Fast Food Accountability and Standards Recovery Act, or AB 257, on Labor Day, despite facing fierce opposition from business groups who warned that the law could increase costs. And they got a quote here saying, today's action gives hardworking fast food workers a stronger voice and a seat at the table to set wages and critical health and safety standards across the industry, Newsom said in a statement. And the bill will create a 10-person council made up of business, labor, and government representatives to designate an industry-wide minimum wage, which could go as high as $22 per hour, with annual raises of either 3.5% or the rate of inflation. So that's just absolutely fantastic, right? Obviously, there are some caveats to this. You're still basically giving, seats at the table to government representatives as well as business representatives, and not just allowing the workers themselves to collectively set the terms of their wages and working conditions and benefits, etc. So there are some caveats to this. Obviously, he's still, giving a little bit of power, a little bit of influence, even in a good piece of legislation like this, to the capitalist class. But that's not surprising, and I think that in the aggregate, this is definitely going to be a very positive bill, to say the least. But going back up to this bullshit talking point up here, with a fierce opposition from business groups who are warning that the law could increase costs. I mean, yeah, it's going to increase your labor costs, sure, but that's not really the main thing that is a significant cost for a lot of these billion-dollar fast food corporations, right? You're talking about a whole host of other costs that are associated with this, and either way, you're talking about corporations who are making billions and billions of dollars in profits and giving billions and billions of dollars to their shareholders in dividends on a regular basis, as well as engaging in stock buybacks. So the idea that they don't have the money in order to pay their workers living wages is just complete fucking bullshit, okay? If you didn't want to potentially have your costs increase on the consumer side or something like this, then maybe cut into your shareholder profits instead of trying to suppress the wages of your workers who are actually providing the value for your company to be so profitable in the first place. So that talking point is just completely fucking ridiculous, but they continue saying that the bill could trigger duplicate laws nationwide. That would be absolutely fucking amazing. They say the law also may signal the reemergence of sectoral bargaining. So instead of just having individual store locations or even individual companies as well, you would have basically a mega union in some sense and have sectoral bargaining depending on which industry that you're talking about, which is absolutely amazing because the more workers that you have engaging in this collective action, the more power that you are going to have and the more that you're going to be able to get in these types of bargaining situations. But they say it's a tactic in which workers from different companies in the same industry negotiate for pay together, as I just said, and the bill will cover as many as 550,000 fast food workers in California. So this is going to have a pretty big impact, not only for those 550,000 workers there, but also when you raise wages in one industry or at one, a store or at one corporation, then that also has the tendency to raise wages across the board, because then other companies are going to have to try to match that basically to attract more workers. But they continue here saying by the numbers, the minimum wage in California is currently at $15 an hour for employers with 26 or more employees and $14 an hour for companies that have less than 25 workers. And they say the other side down here, getting into more of this propaganda approach from a lot of these franchisee owners, They got a quote here saying, by signing AB 257 into law, Governor Newsom has not leveled the playing field, but instead targeted one slice of California's small businesses and consumers who rely on counter-service restaurants to feed their families, the campaign to stop the law said in a statement on Monday. Okay, so what the fuck are these motherfuckers talking about? Okay, so they're somehow saying that this is not leveling the playing field. Well, sure, it's not going the full extent of leveling the playing field, and I would argue from a socialist position that this doesn't go even nearly far enough in terms of leveling the playing field in this country between workers and the capitalists who own these companies. So in that sense, it would be correct, but that's not the critique that she's giving here, right? She's saying this is not leveling the playing field because you're harming corporations like McDonald's and all of these other, billion-dollar fast food chain restaurants. You're somehow harming them, okay, as they're reaping billions of dollars in profits off the back of the workers on a regular basis. You're somehow harming them and, not creating a level playing field between like McDonald's and other industries that some workers could work out. So it's just a completely lazy and bullshit talking point that they're putting forward here. So they continue here with a quote from one of these McDonald's franchisee owners. She said, "My people are the backbone of my business and will always come first." Complete bullshit. Okay, we know that this is bullshit. Capitalism has an inherent antagonism baked within this system between workers and capital owners. If you are the owner of a McDonald's franchise, I'm sure that you're not doing as well as like the CEO or the executive. You're probably still doing pretty fucking all right. But at the same time, there is that fundamental antagonism that is baked within the capitalist system where people who own a McDonald's and have to hire workers, they don't have the interests of the workers at their heart, right? These are people who want to suppress wages as much as possible, keep those labor costs down so that they can keep more money either for themselves or for the shareholders in the form of dividends and paybacks, etc. So I think that all of these pushback talking points from the business class over in California are pretty ridiculous at face value if you think about it for even more than 2 seconds, especially considering that a lot of these workers are currently making the $15 minimum wage per hour, which especially in a very expensive state like California is nowhere close to a living wage. And again, $22 an hour is pretty decent, but at the same time, you're really barely scraping by, okay? $22 an hour does not make you extraordinarily wealthy, right? It doesn't mean that you can easily feed your family and, be able to maintain stable housing or anything like that, let alone healthcare costs or other associated costs. But at the end of the day, the net calculation of this bill is that it's definitely a significant positive. And again, it's not just about like having temporary wage increases or something like that. It's also about the power that this is going to give to potentially industry-wide sectors, this time within the fast food industry, where you could have significantly larger pools of workers who are able to come together collectively and instead of, begging for crumbs on the side as individuals, act collectively to then make those demands. And if their demands are not met, then they can go on strike and they can use other tactics that are available to unions in order to get those demands met by basically use of force. So, I mean, this is just an absolutely amazing law. Somewhat surprised that Gavin Newsom signed it into law, honestly. I mean, this is something where it was like, in my head, at least 50-50. He could have gone either way. He's been kind of flip-flopping in terms of like supporting progressive legislation and then denying other pieces of progressive legislation as well, and really standing in the way of a lot of these things. But another really positive piece of legislation that he signed recently back in July was basically that California is now apparently going to be making their own generic low-cost insulin and basically inserting that into the marketplace, which will significantly lower the costs across the board for insulin, and not just in California, but again in other states as well. And hopefully, as they were pointing out in that article, this is like sort of a trickle effect where now other states will be pressured because of how successful these programs are inevitably going to be for average working class people in California. Maybe other states will follow suit and pass similar laws to this. So again, this was an example of him sort of bucking his donor class and pushing back against a lot of the corrupting influences that sometimes sway his opinion on some pieces of legislation. But this was absolutely great. Again, you have this recent AB 257, which was absolutely great. But then on the flip side, you also have examples of this motherfucker just demonstrating how much of a sellout he actually is. And one of the perfect examples of that was when he basically blocked the ability for the California state legislature to vote on a basically statewide Medicare for All program by trying to run out the clock and feeding into the many billions, or sorry, not billions, but millions, or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars that he gets from these gigantic health insurance corporations who are ripping off people in California and around the United United States. And this was an example where you could have had single payer in California and then also had potentially a trickle down effect where that spreads to other states as well. But then you had Gavin Newsom step in here and basically prevent that from happening almost unilaterally. So this was an example of his corruption getting the better of him. But, at the end of the day, I think this legislation is going to be absolutely amazing for definitely fast food workers, but again, across the board, because the more people that you have in unions, the more people that you have engaging in collective bargaining, the better the wage increases, the better the benefits, the better the working conditions are going to be, not just for those individual workers, but across the economy as a whole. But just as a reminder here in terms of why it's a good thing to join a union and why we should be standing in solidarity with a lot of these union fights and drives that are going on across the country. So here from The Guardian, they say, feel the benefit. Union workers receive far better pay and rights. Congress finds. Study shows unionized workers earn 10.2% more than non-union peers amid wave of organizing at some of the largest U.S. employers. So, I mean, the reality here is pretty simple, right? If you have a union at your workplace, instead of having to go to your boss and beg for a wage increase or, try to appeal to these massive corporate structures to fix some, safety violations or health violations within your workplace, if you want to actually reliably be able to fight and achieve better benefits, better pay, better working conditions as well, you have to have a union, right? Engaging in this collective action is infinitely superior to doing this on an individual basis. So any piece of legislation, whether it's like the PRO Act that has been stalled up in Congress and that Biden isn't even really pretending to fight for anymore, or whether it's pieces like this within individual states like California, the more that we can continue to spread this sort of revitalization of the American labor movement, the better it's going to be for workers, and not just workers at those locations, but again, across the board. Because, the more people you have that are fighting for those better benefits, better pay, better working conditions as well, that basically puts an upward pressure on the rest of the economy and forces a lot of companies to somewhat follow suit in that direction. So, I mean, I would honestly take a piece of legislation like this over even getting like Joe Biden's $15 minimum wage plan. And if you could have something like the PRO Act pass, I think that would also be superior to even having something like a $15 minimum wage. Because if you actually look at the details of what Biden's plan was that stupidly got struck down by the Senate parliamentarian, that was like $15 minimum wage by like 2025. And, you're going to be going up in increments. And by that time, that's barely going to be a living wage anyways. So, if you go look at other countries that have significantly more union representation, have a higher rate or a higher percentage of their labor force that are within unions, especially these industry-wide unions, you basically don't even need to worry about what the federal minimum wage laws actually are, because unions are just far superior to getting those better wages than even having like federal standards. So, this is a type of piece of legislation that I would love to see passed at the federal level, but I guess somewhat credit to Gavin Newsom for falling down on the right side of this issue. And if he does happen to want to run for president in 2024 or 2028, then keep doing shit like this, because this is going to win people over and somewhat demonstrate that you are at least capable of sometimes bucking corporate America and bucking the donorship class and actually fighting for things that could materially improve average working class people's lives.